Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about the Great American Read. This is a program that PBS has been doing this summer, and basically they got viewers to vote on their favorite books, and they picked the top 100 and made them into a list, and they spent the whole summer trying to get people to read these books and then go online and vote for which one's their favorite. And I believe you get to vote once a day. PBS did a show to launch the program at the beginning of the summer, and now that it's getting into fall, they're doing different little shows to highlight the books, and then at the end of the whole Great American Read, they will announce which book got the most votes and is America's #1 favorite book. I will leave a link to the Great American Read website in the description, so if you want to learn more, you can go find out about it and vote for your favorite book. So I have finished 35 of the 100 books, and I thought I would share my opinions about them. So 1984 by George Orwell is a science fiction book set in a dystopian future. It was written back when 1984 sounded like the distant future, and it takes place in a world where the government controls every aspect of human life and is constantly rewriting history and can see everything about humans. And if you hear the phrase "Big Brother is watching," that's where that phrase comes from. I love science fiction books, and I really enjoyed this one. It makes you think a lot. A Confederacy of Dunces is the only book that I started during the Great American Read. I just finished it, and I had so much fun with it. The characters are amazingly colorful, and it's just this chaotic, fun story that follows some very eclectic and eccentric characters. A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin is like a Renaissance fantasy series. It's based heavily on the War of the Roses, and I have read the first 3 books in the series. I believe there are about 5 published now, but this series is not done yet, so we're all hoping that George R.R. Martin finishes the series sometime in his lifetime. This series is a lot of fun. It has so many characters. When I first started reading it, I had to keep a list of all the characters to keep them straight, and they actually include a list in the back of the books now, so you can go look up who is who. But despite how long this series is, it's very easy to get through, and it's a lot of fun. The Anne of Green Gables series by Lucy Maud Montgomery is just a delight. It's about a little orphan girl, I believe she's 11 when the series starts, who goes to live with old curmudgeon-y brother and sister who have a farm, and her outlook on life is just so amazing. She's just able to see the joy in everything, and that spirit is so contagious. I read Bless Me Ultima by Rudolfo Anaya when I was in high school, and I enjoyed it. It's set in New Mexico. It has kind of a magical realism feel, and it's just all about the culture and history of the group of people who aren't Mexican immigrants, because they've lived in the United States for hundreds of years, but they have cultural roots in Mexico and Mexican traditions. And it was just such a beautiful story, and I loved getting to know those characters and that culture. So I very recently finished Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. I was actually already reading it when I heard about the Great American Read. This book is so satirical, and I love it so much. It's set during World War II, and it just makes fun of everything. It makes fun of the military, it makes fun of war, it makes fun of bureaucracy, and just people in general, and if you've ever had an incompetent boss or anything like that, this book is so much fun and just so sarcastic. The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis is an amazing, magical, wonderful series that I grew up reading. I have no idea how many times I've read it, and it is just such delightful fun. Please, if you have not read this series, go pick up The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and start reading. You will not regret it. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is a fun book. It's about a young boy who has autism, and it's just his journey trying to figure out the world and make sense of a world that other people seem to understand much more than he does. And I liked it a lot. It really helped me try to kind of see the world from the perspective of someone whose mind works differently than mine, and really helped me form a lot of empathy for the main character and for people with autism. The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown is a very fun, complicated mystery. It's this big giant conspiracy theory that all of the major artists and people throughout history have hidden messages, and now you have to go solve the clue, and the book is like one giant historical scavenger hunt. 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James is not a particularly good book, but it is very entertaining, and it's not nearly as bad as a lot of people think it is based on all the bad press it gets. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is a very fun monster story that's more about human nature and just how humans interact with each other and kind of the nature of parenthood and the responsibilities that go with bringing another creature into this world, more than it is actually a monster book. It's a very interesting story that is often called the first science fiction novel ever written. The Giver by Lois Lowry is the first dystopian novel I ever read. I believe I read it in middle school, and it is just such a beautiful story about a civilization that has taken away a lot of the things that we consider to be basic facts of life and basic things that make us human and make life worth living. And it's about this character's discovery of the things that humanity has lost and him trying to decide if those things are worth having or not. And it is a beautiful story. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is an amazing thriller. It starts off fairly slowly and then just takes off, and it's amazing to get into the minds of these incredibly disturbed characters. I'm usually not a very big fan of thrillers, but this book got me really interested in them, and since I read it, I've been reading more and more thrillers. I tried to read Gone with the Wind when I was in high school, and I made it through about 4 chapters and gave up. That book is very dense, and it's just not for me. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald is a very enjoyable book. I wasn't sure I was going to like it because I've heard some of the analysis that people do of it, and I am not an analysis person. So I read it and didn't look for any symbolism or any metaphors and enjoyed it quite a bit. The Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling is the Harry Potter series. I don't think it really needs an introduction. These are amazing books that I have read more times than I can count and that are a huge part of my childhood and really helped me get to know the world. Hatchet is a book that I had to read in middle school, and it was not for me. I'm not a fan of stories where people are dumped out in the wilderness and have to survive, and that is the entire plot of this book. So I finished it, and I won't be reading it again. I would say it is my least favorite book on this list, but listed right after it is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This book is about a European colonial man who's going to Africa to watch people colonize and generally ruin life for Africans. It is an incredibly depressing novel that's full of symbolism. I read it during high school and barely got through it. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Douglas Adams is so much fun. I've read all of the books in the series written by Douglas Adams. A few people tried to carry it on, but I've only read his works. And these books are so ridiculous and zany. They're some of the most creative things I've ever read, and they are just a delight. They just follow a few characters as they travel around the galaxy, having wild and ridiculous adventures that are completely random and strange in a way that makes perfect sense. And I love them so much. The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins is a very fun young adult series. I read them when all the books were released, but before the movies came out, and I had a lot of fun just enjoying that world and just getting to know a young adult dystopian world before there were young adult dystopian worlds everywhere and they all started looking alike. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton is a lot of fun. I had seen the movies before I read the book, but I still really enjoyed it. It has great suspense and tension and wonderful scenes between the humans and the dinosaurs. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott is a very cute, fun little story about a group of sisters living in the 1800s and just kind of coming of age. So it's a great cozy book for when you're in the mood to curl up with a mug of hot tea. Looking for Alaska by John Green is about a young boy who goes off to boarding school and kind of his coming-of-age experiences. I've read all of John Green's novels, and I like them all. This one's not my favorite, but it still has some very interesting things to say about what it's like to be a teenager and how we perceive people and what kind of expectations we put on them. The Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien is the most famous fantasy series of all time. I've read it several times, and the books can be a little slow to get into, but they are so worth it. Middle-earth is just so rich, so detailed, and so well thought out, and I love getting lost in this world. I read The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold when I was in middle school, and it is a very interesting story. It's told from the perspective of a girl who has just been murdered, and she's looking down at her family and seeing how they cope with her death. It's a very beautiful, calm book, and it just kind of lets you see how people process emotions and how they deal with grief. The Martian by Andy Weir is one of the most fun science fiction books I've ever read. I love how well thought out all the science in the book is and how much you see everything that our main character does, and I had so much fun following his adventures on Mars. I read Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden quite a few years ago, so I don't really remember very many of the specifics of the plot, but I do remember that it was very fascinating to watch this young girl grow up and see how hard her life was and how hard she had to work to try to fit in this very complicated and hostile society. And I was just engrossed watching her story and seeing how she managed to find her own place in the world. The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks is a wonderful, fun, cozy read when you just need to have a little bit of romance in your life. It's very similar to other Nicholas Sparks novels, but it's great at giving you that nice, cozy, warm feeling. The Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon is a very long, epic series about a woman from 1940s England who finds herself traveling back to Scotland in the 1700s. These books are very long, but also very easy to get through. I've read the first 4 books in the series, and they are so fast-paced. It's kind of like reading a historical soap opera, and just seeing all the drama that happens is so much fun, and you get so invested in these characters' lives. I read The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton when I was in middle school, I believe, and I didn't really appreciate the series at the time. Since then, I've learned that it was written by a young woman, and looking back on it, it seems like it has some very fascinating messages to say about life for teenagers living in the kind of poorer areas of the city, and I would really like to go back and read it again, because I would think I would get a lot more out of it than I did the first time I read it. I have read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen many times. I love all of Jane Austen's novels. Pride and Prejudice is definitely the most famous one, and it is one of my top 3 or 4 favorite Jane Austen novels. It's such a fun story about the politics of Edwardian England, and about all the trials and tribulations that young women have to go through to try to find a place in the world. I recently read Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, and it is a very fun science fiction video game romp through the 80s. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is a very fun and creepy ghost story set in a giant old mansion about a woman trying to fill the shoes of her husband's dead first wife. It's very good to read around Halloween, and if you can get through the kind of dense language, it's a lot of fun. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe is a very interesting tragedy story about a tribal leader living in Africa just as it's being colonized by Europeans. And it's a very interesting look at how cultures change. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee is a beautiful coming-of-age story about how children learn the way that the society works and learn what things like hate and racism are and how they can combat those things and learn to be good people. And finally, Twilight by Stephenie Meyer is a very fun fantasy book that I loved when I was about 15. I read that book so many times, and it was a big part of my adolescence. Those are all of the books that I have read from the Great American Read. I look forward to reading more of them, so I'm going to go look at the list and figure out which one I should